Now let's turn toward our final panel discussion today. It's the one I've been waiting for because it's always very important to talk about accountability. I heard that when Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Resendez was talking. Our policy leaders are very leading the charge, right? To hold themselves, hold city staff accountable as key cornerstones of our work in advancing racial equity. So our previous panelists spoke on the importance of centering equity in policy and using performance measures and data to operationalize it. Now we're turning our discussion as to how we can hold municipalities and other organizations accountable for equity measures and the role of rebuilding trust within our communities. Moderating this discussion is none other than the famous Dr. Michael J. Sorrell, president of Paul Quinn College. And when I say famous, I am not using flowery language. He was just awarded the Bush Institute Trailblazer Citation. He's been named one of the world's 50 greatest leaders by Fortune magazine. And Time recently called him one of the 31 people changing the South. So among his numerous accomplishments, he's been with us from the very beginning of the symposium, which we first hosted at Paul Quinn College, and we hope to do again in the near future. Dr. Sorrell is the longest serving president of the 149-year history of Paul Quinn College. And during his 15 years of leadership, Paul Quinn has become a national movement for its efforts to remake higher education to become more responsive to student and societal needs. So with no further ado, let me introduce you to a person whom I call friend, compañero, Dr. Sorrell. Thank you for being here and moderating this important discussion. I'll turn it now over to you.
Thank you, Liz. It is so good to see you. And let me just say, I love seeing Chief in front of your name now. So this is what happens when you've been friends with someone for a very long time and you've watched them just continue to be amazing for years upon years and years. So it is so good to be with you all this morning for this important conversation. And let me just say, just right out of the gate, having conversations around accountability in anything you do is particularly important. But it is critically important when you're dealing with an issue like equity, where for so long people have trusted and believed and been betrayed and been disappointed. And so as you know, you may look up and say, but I didn't do that, or we didn't do that. But none of us arrive at these moments independent of experiences that happened before. And so just as we stand on the shoulders of giants, sometimes we stand on the shoulders of people who have failed. And we have to be accountable to that. We have to understand that, and we have to rise above that. So in our conversation today, for the brief amount of time that we have together, I look forward to pushing the conversation around this conversation of accountability and how we actually accomplish that. And I am so excited for the three individuals who share this panel discussion with me today. Our first participant is Diana Flores, who's the Vice President of Organizational Development at the Greater Dallas Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Diana, welcome. It's so good to have you here. Next up is my pew friend, Pastor Danielle Ayers, the Minister of Justice from Friendship West Baptist Church. Danielle and I have shared a pew together for, I can't remember how many years, but what I can tell you is she's incredibly patient, as she has allowed my son, who sits in the pew with us, to grow up being a mess, sitting in her vicinity. So Danielle, it's always wonderful to see you and to share time with you. And then Dr. Eric Ban, who's the Managing Director of Dallas County Promise, which is just an extraordinary program, one which is moving the needle in our community and making education more accessible. And one of my favorite things about Dr. Ban is he's also a basketball fan. And we are two Midwestern guys with deep basketball roots. So It's just wonderful, wonderful to have you here as well. So welcome to each of the panelists. I hope you all are doing well and staying safe in this incredibly challenging time. And so what I thought we would do first is to start out with, you know, a 1-minute introduction from each of you, just to talk a little bit about why you're excited to be here with us today, and then we'll jump into the questions. So we'll start with Diana.
Well, good morning, everyone. And I'm really excited to be a part of this panel and so excited about this initiative led by Liz and her team. As we know, unless you plan, and I'm going to also use this phrase in my remarks, you plan to fail. There's no citywide plan. And guess what? We're at the point where we are at, but this portends great possibilities for finally the city of Dallas showing everyone else how it's done. And just want to thank you, Dr. Sorrell, and also I'm a great admirer of all your accomplishments and your commitments to higher ed, especially higher ed for students of color. And just to add, I'm here in my position as trustee of District 6 Dallas College.
Oh, well, great to have you here. And thank you. All right, Danielle.
Yes, good morning. Super excited to be here and always great to see you. Don't see as much as I used to. You know, you're super important nowadays. And so we're so proud of you. And I'm glad to be here, particularly as we stand on the eve of the birth of Dr. King. We're doing this on the weekend of Dr. King's birthday. And I think what's happening here today really represents the best of his life, his ministry, and his legacy. If we are to live that out as it relates to pulling cross sectors together to have this collective conversation. Because King really dedicated his life to not organizing necessarily service projects, but organizing in ways that we can challenge policies and laws, right, that may be unjust, that lead to inequity, that we might change and have accountability to those who have responsibility for creating the correct policies and laws so that we all can flourish. And for King, it would be what it means to create this beloved community. So I'm super excited to be here and to add to this conversation with my other co-panelists, and certainly to be able to have you moderate this should be a joy. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. All right, Eric.
And thank you, President Sorrell. Really excited to get into some games down at Paul Quinn and follow the Twitter and see how the success of your team. So congratulations on that. My name is Eric Ban, former head of the Dallas County Promise, but I'd like to kind of say that the Dallas stock is split. So we replaced myself with a fabulous new person, Katrina James, who is overseeing college and career readiness at the Harlem Children's Zone. And she is doing a great job leading the Dallas County Promise. And relevant to this conversation, what we realized early on is we needed better data and better systems to really understand the journey of every student through our K-12, higher ed, and employment systems in order to be smarter and better as a community. And as we kind of started to develop those, it became a very much of a passion. So I'm leading a new group called Economic Mobility Systems to really help the community organize that information and be smart and strategic. And going back to, Councilman Thomas in his earlier panel this morning, be very intentional about the work. So delighted to be here and excited for the panel.
Thank you. All right, well, we are going to jump in first with the first question for Diana. Given your leadership across several sectors and being the first Latina in history to chair, first Latina or Latino to chair the Dallas College Board, can you speak to key components of accountability as it regards racial and ethnic equity?
Well, while I was chair, thank you, Dr. Sorrell, for that question. When I was chair, I established the first DEI committee of the board, because if it's not getting constant attention at the board level, then staff don't give it the attention they need to give it. So let me lay some additional context to answer that question. It's the goal of Dallas College to ensure that Dallas County remains vibrant, growing, and economically viable for current and future generations. Now, Dallas College approaches this through not only setting the foundation for racial and ethnic equity in our staff, but also impacting the lives of our students by providing high quality education, which in turn can lead to racial and ethnic equity in the broader society because of how they are able to participate in society. As a member of the Dallas College Board, I work to ensure Dallas College students and staff adequately represent the Dallas County demography. The board has made fair and equitable hiring practices a priority with great success and will be establishing an organizational DEI committee, which will guide professional development to create greater social and cultural awareness to better serve our students. And in addition, we're researching ways to link the current employee review process to pay increases, which provide staff who are excellent at their jobs added incentive to stay with us and continue being excellent in serving students. So we not only look at racial and ethnic equity internally, but also externally through our students.
No, that's fantastic. Let me ask you this. Accountability is the buzzword, right? Like, I think sometimes people like to use it, but they don't necessarily understand how it impacts the lives of people directly. How have you seen accountability really have a benefit when it's done right, and how it has, hurt when people haven't held up their end of the bargain?
Well, usually, Michael, when you're talking about accountability as regards racial and ethnic equity, it basically doesn't exist. That's in my opinion, because there's not that real commitment. If there's a commitment, then the accountability will be built in. However, at Dallas College, I keep pushing and board members keep pushing, we need to do this. It's the right thing to do. So Dallas College is more focused than ever in helping students transition out of our college, having met their educational goals. And why? Because equipping them for high-skilled, high-demand jobs upon graduation, they're able to change the trajectory of their lives, not only for themselves, but for their families and communities as well. And I'm going to give you two examples of accountability of why we expect the outcomes of success for our students using Dallas ISD students in our partnership with them. So first, in 2009, only 7% of Dallas ISD graduating seniors had earned an associate degree 6 years after high school graduation. That was 2009, only 7%, 6 years after, had a degree from us. So seeing that and knowing that something different needed to change, we laid groundwork beginning back then, which is now paying off. In May of this year, the Dallas ISD seniors graduating from high school with an associate degree was 10%. 10% graduating not only with their high school diploma, but with their associate degree, and many more graduating with college credits that they can apply to a college degree. That's a vast improvement from where we were, but it's taken us some years to get there. Now, the second point, in 2020, of the students who graduated from the early college or P-TECH high schools with an associate degree or certificates, many got a job earning an average of $50,000 annually. So many of them with their first job are making 50% more than the average annual income of many of their parents, which in Dallas is $32,000. Now that is a game changer. And again, that is their first job upon graduation. They're setting the foundation for being high wage earners for them and their family for the rest of their lives. The hope is that they will not stop at an associate degree, but they will continue their education to earn their bachelor's and more. And the probability of that is increased since they are already familiar with the college going experience. So you have to set the plan, you have to set the goals, you have to set the metrics, and you have to hold people accountable. And it's paying off for students in this particular cohort, in these particular cohorts. And the same is being true of all of our students.
Well, let me ask you, just tweak this a little bit. What's the demographics of Dallas County schools? I mean, Dallas College schools.
48% Hispanic. I believe it's 25 or 28% African American, and the rest are Anglo, Asian, etc. Now, in higher ed, as you know, Dr. Sorrell, because you're in that field, it's rare. It's rare when higher ed institutions match their demography. Dallas College exceeds the demography. Dallas County has 42% Hispanic residents. We have 48% students. It has, I believe, 22 or 23% African Americans. We have 28% African American students. So we're doing things that are very right, but also it didn't just happen magically. It didn't happen automatically. It happened with a lot of hard work.
Absolutely. And what I find interesting, and this is a problem across all of higher ed, right? And educational institutions, not Dallas County, because Dallas College is doing extraordinary things in this area. But I'm fascinated by the acknowledgement, and we all know it's true. So this isn't like, I'm not picking on anyone, but just that, we haven't really engaged in equity the way that we should. And yet 76% plus of our students come from communities where if there was ever an opportunity to have cover for doing the right thing, you have it because it's just so clear who you're dealing with. Exactly. And so here we are at this interesting moment in time where, like, I don't know if it gets any better than it'll get right now to affect the type of mechanisms that we so desperately need to ensure that equity is done the way it needs to be done.
Well, we're certainly committed to that. We're not giving lip service to it. Our mission is to transform lives and communities through higher education, because that is how, again, to use another word I've already used, that's how you change the trajectory of not only the student, but the family and the community. We are committed to that. And as you said, we put a lot of things in place to make sure it gets done. We know it's not going to happen unless you have a plan, unless you have a budget assigned, etc.
No, that's so true. Thank you. All right, Danielle. So listen, I don't know how many of our participants are familiar with the structure of the Black church, but let me say this, there aren't a lot of churches that have a minister of justice, right? Which speaks to Friendship West's commitment to this area and this issue. And, first, why don't you just for a moment explain what it means to be a minister of justice and the intersection of the areas that this entails?
Sure, yeah, thank you so much for that. So I'll try to make it very plain, because a lot of days I don't know, all I'm doing is so much going on. So, but I think in the context of the Black church, right, we think of it in terms of being born out of resistance during enslavement. And one of the enduring or things that are very foundational to the Black church is this notion that God cares about our lives between Sundays. And it's not just about going to church on Sunday morning, but it's about what do we do about the issues that impact people who sit in our congregations on Sundays, what are they up against throughout the week? And that we have an obligation then to respond to that in ways kind of based in our faith. And I think, again, I'll just keep going back to King's since this is his weekend. And one of the things King's ministry was really rooted and grounded in was his faith. And that faith led him out into the streets to protest. We saw King marching, right? But we also saw where his faith led him into the corridors of power to impact policy and laws, because King understood that it was certainly the obligation of the faith community to have something to say about how resources are distributed, how humanity is being treated, that human rights, right, were upheld. And so I think for us as a Black church, we're just really on a trajectory of Black churches who have done this for centuries. When we think about the AME church, in terms of how they birthed mutual aid societies to deal with employing people, handling healthcare, burying people, opening up schools, Paul Quinn College, right? So I think we are in that tradition. So for us, it's both and. Church and community are not separated. They are one and the same. And so my role and responsibilities and my accountability to the church and community is to ensure that I am, I guess I'll say it this way, understood, and it's really rooted in our organizational goals as well. One, define and empower. define who are we as a community, right? And then what do we use to empower us? Well, I think we're already empowered, but what do we do to unleash the power that we have to be actively engaged in public life? Our faith and public life intersect and we can't get away from it. So how do we best use our faith to enter into that space for change? And then I think it's about connecting and engaging not only people, but connecting and engaging in political systems. So what does that mean? That means, do we understand theoretically how political systems work and then how they work in reality? And that can only come about by being deeply engaged, going to city council meetings, you know, sitting in on committee meetings, joining committee meetings when you can, working with your elected officials. And really researching too, right? It's also about understanding policy and law. So that requires us to do quite a bit of reading. It also requires us to do a lot of partnerships, particularly with policy institutes, with the academy, other national organizations. Is really, how do you do a power map of where do you have your own structural holes and how do you plug those in? Because as a church, we can't do it all. And so really my role is to really, how do I bring all of this together with the partnerships and make sure the congregation stays up to speed, up to date on what's happening in the world, what's happening in their city, and then how they can be actively engaged and involved in that. Because I think when we do that, then we're able to understand what accountability means on the inside, but then how does that translate then to the city if we're going to be engaged in really dealing with the equity indicators that we talk about, right? And I think about economic justice is one of our areas, and economic opportunity is one of the equity indicators, right? And poverty sits in that indicator as well. So it's about, for us, when we engage in the payday lending, for example, how we then Councilman Jerry Allen took on that charge from the council standpoint. And then we're able to build a coalition of people throughout the city of Dallas to pass policies some 12 years ago, right? And we're still in that battle. But I think it just goes back to understanding that how do we really define, empower, measure, inform, understand data drives, you know, our strategies on how we go about dealing with inequities, but understanding the history too, right? We have to clearly understand that this didn't happen by happenstance, right? That there's a historical data behind why we're seeing what we're seeing. And then what do we do to bring equity, which means you have to deal with and repair that which was broken or that which created the inequities in the first place, right? I think somewhere here you have to have reconciliation in this process to repair what has been broken or destroyed or torn down as relates to communities, particularly infrastructure in certain community areas. So I hope that answered your question.
No, it did, and then some. So in listening to all that, then how do you measure your effectiveness?
Yeah, so for me, it depends on the issue that we're engaged in. So for example, let's just stick with the payday lending piece, right? How do I measure how effective we are in that battle for well over 12 years? So first thing I do is try to set expectations with some of this. And I think it's even when we're talking about how do we deal with this, when we get this citywide plan, we have to be realistic too in terms of timing, because all of this is some of this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. So it can't be this didn't happen this year, therefore we failed. For me, I measure impact would be, did we move the needle? What happened during particularly, maybe what happened down in Austin during this legislative session? What happened, you know, at city council? So for me, I measure impact by, was there movement? Were we able to get more people on board with the movement, right? I think I have different impact areas where I try to at least try to determine what kind of measure of success did we have when we engage in various issues. So I think with the payday lending, I can pick out certain, what I would call small wins along the way. And that would be the ordinances that we passed 12 years ago. That would be us acquiring a credit union where we can now offer small dollar loans to people as opposed to them going to high interest rates, payday lenders in the community, right? I think I can measure that by us having ongoing conversations in front of Congress when we try to testify, you know, before finance committees. I think it's ongoing and we're building. I think movement is about building, and we may get it to some point and the next generation may take it to the next leg, right? I think we just see that in all movements. I think Angela Davis says freedom is a constant struggle, right? So I think each generation has an obligation to push us a little further along the way. So that's how I typically try to measure impact, was what if any movement did we have, and how are we communicating that to everyone who is engaged and involved so they can understand a lot of this will not happen overnight, but we certainly can move the needle in order to get to the change. So really the substantive, right, substantial change that we are looking for, comprehensive sustainability, right, is what we're going after.
Okay, so then, and just so we're clear, I've heard you, it's important to set the expectations, right? So that people understand what we're aiming for and what's possible. Then it's about being able to measure the impact, right? Like how far you've moved the needle. So you need some type of determinant or some type of standard to allow you to measure what that looks like. And then also, and this would probably be more of a qualitative piece to it, that you're expressing that this is a continuum, right? Like we may not get all the way to where we want to be right away. So taking that then, and thank you, Danielle, then Eric, turning my question to you is, I think this continuum idea is especially important given how you have, how you all started the Dallas County Promise. And then as you start to transition it, right? And you're transitioning away from the original role that you had, right? So as you look at the continuum, as you look at the county promise, Dallas County Promise, where on the continuum do you think you all are? And how are you measuring success now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, as you look at Dallas County over the last, let's take the, college enrollment, for example, and focused on equity in college enrollment, which was a big driver of the, Dallas College leadership and a lot of our higher ed partner leaders in the community, impacting and increasing that number of students. There's about 30,000 high school seniors in Dallas County. We put now annually more than 1,200 more students a year into higher education and increase their financial aid completion. So if you just look at the sheer numbers of financial aid, federal money coming into Dallas County to support our students, and also the impact of House Bill 3 of more students testing college ready, and what Commit has done in Austin in terms of helping to support policy changes to flow more public dollars to traditionally under-invested communities. And then also look at the impact of formula funding, and then the potential of the living wage attainment that Trustee Flores kind of spoke to. It's about $35 million impact annually per cohort in terms of taking a look at your high school seniors and then getting them into higher education, supported with new dollars, both federal dollars and state dollars, adding those resources to our community and building a plan. And I know the school district leaders are really rallying to that task. And what we are showing up to try to do with our data systems is just help them be courageous in their equity leadership, to understand where the issues are in real time, to look at data on students, and to really have the tools and the case management approach to really support more and more students, and to see things. We're very good in Texas of understanding our problems because of our kind of historic data investment. We're not as good at solving our problems, and that requires a different approach to data. And you have to know what students need at the point they need it when you're talking to them. You have to have the data and information that's timely and relevant to really support students. And that's kind of what we're showing up to do. So I think in terms of where we are in the continuum, we started this in 2017. We started very simply with Dallas College leadership, standing up kind of a community Salesforce initiative to support cohorts of students. Here, sitting 5 years later, each school district also has Salesforce. Dallas College and the school districts are sharing data so that they can see and understand the student journey, because the chancellor of the community college asked us to really understand the friction points, unpack the student journey, live and travel with those students to understand their pain points, and really systematically try to eliminate them and activate data to those on the front lines in terms of advisors and admissions officers and success coaches to help them succeed. So I think we are, again, I think it's been spoken here many a times, this is a marathon and not a sprint. So we've made significant progress, and a lot of other regions are coming here to watch what we have done. And I kind of describe us as the fastest turtle in the race in terms of getting our systems organized to really truly own the outcome for every single student in our community as a community and as a collection of institutions.
No, thank you. All right, so I am going to make a moderator's privilege and change this up a little bit. And we're going to engage in a bit of a lightning round for the last last 30 minutes or so of our time together. So I'm going to ask each of you questions and you get 1 minute to respond, right? And the reason for the 1 minute response is so that I can get to ask you more questions. All right, like that is a very selfish reason. I'm just putting it out there in front. I've got my timer. All right, so we will just follow the cycle that we have had. All right, so my first question is going to be to you, Diana. One of the things that we have seen at Paul Quinn, let me back up and frame it this way. We view equity differently at Paul Quinn. We don't have any diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, right? We have values, and everything we do, we test ourselves. Is this consistent with our values, right? And the proof should be pretty apparent. So for example, we said our institutional ethos is we over me, and we should reflect the issues that are important to our community. When we started, we had a 3% Hispanic enrollment. We're now up to 20% Hispanic enrollment. Not because we went out and specifically recruited Hispanic students, but because we just started telling our story of openness and caring to everyone. And that allowed us to do. But one way we communicated that was our work in the Dreamer community, which we didn't even fully appreciate when I started. So my question to you and for all of the speakers, question number one in the lightning round is this. We have a significant Dreamer population in this city. How do we create systems which make it plain that they are welcome, and how do we measure whether or not we're being successful in helping that population be welcome? So Diana, you are up first. The clock is ticking, go.
1998, I led the effort at the board to allow undocumented students to enroll in Dallas College, paying the same tuition as resident students. Previously, no other institution of higher education in the nation had done that. So we set that standard back in 1998. Based on what Dallas College did in 2001, then Representative Rick Noriega spearheaded that at the state legislature, so that it was called the Noriega Act. I don't know what it's called now, but since 2001, undocumented students have been able to enroll in publicly supported institutions in the state of Texas without having to pay out of country tuition. As Texas went, 19 other states have gone. We have not been able to pass the National Dream Act, but students know that since 1998, they have been accepted and welcomed. And our first scholarship for all students, Rising Star, was available to undocumented students. Dallas Promise is available to undocumented students. They know that we welcome them, and we've been doing that since '98.
Fantastic. So to go back to the point that you made at the outset, you established a program and a policy, put resources behind it to make it possible for people to succeed in that. And we now have evidence, not just what we've done in the community because of your efforts, but how that has spurred change in states throughout the country, right? It's going to be tough to beat that answer in the lightning round, all right? You know, great job, man, great job. All right, so Danielle, I'm going to tweak it a little bit for you, but we're going to maintain the Dreamer focus. Many people might be surprised to find out that the Black church cares about Dreamers too, right? So why don't you talk a little bit about what efforts that you've seen folks do to on behalf of Dreamers?
Yeah, so I'll answer it this way, because I think the reason why we're connected and engaged with Dreamers, because for us, right, there's no separation. Because we think about immigrants, right, we see it as a collective. It's not just Dreamers. It would be Haitian immigrants. It would be Congolese immigrants. It would be anyone trying to come to this country, right, in pursuit of a better life. So you cannot only focus on one group. It's about the totality of those who are seeking to come into this country to live a better life. And how do we make them feel welcome, wanted, but also, right, it's representation, I think, is part of this too, right? What are some of the ways in which they can also see themselves in these areas in which we're trying to make sure they have access to? And it has to do with how do we collectively push forth a policy, national federal policy, that ensures they have a clear pathway to citizenship, right? And where they feel welcome and wanted here in America. So for us, we care about Dreamers because we care about Haitians, right? We don't separate them out. For us, it's about people, right? It's about what does it mean to be human and recognize the humanity in people and their ability to move around this globe in search of a better life. And we have an obligation to use our resources, lift our voice, and have a plan and a strategy, right? And what are we going after so that we can properly use our resources and our time?
We are rolling. Okay, so with yours, Danielle, it's about the fact that there is no separation because we are all one, right? One people, and acknowledging the struggles of one builds a bridge for others as well, right? Okay, all right, I see where we're going with this. Eric, now you and I both know that 25% of the city's demographic are Dreamers, right? Which means that all of those families are sending students into the county schools. What did the Dallas Promise and to an extent DISD and other county schools do to help support this population, and how are they measuring it?
Well, we were the beneficiaries of the good work that Trustee Flores mentioned. So by design and by DNA, the Dallas County Promise was part of that culture. And what we were just trying to do is better understand the realities of the journey of all students, including our Dreamers. And really through a lot of feedback from texting and emailing, a lot of surveying, and a lot of empathy interviews that we conducted, trying to understand their journeys and their pain points, and started to kind of operationalize them in terms of reducing those pain points when they hit things like forms and the need to have just to do different things that were very difficult for these families to do in terms of accessing higher education. So I think what we were challenged to do and what we attempted to do is operationalize a more equitable journey for the Dreamers into our higher education partners, and really got to work on, again, standing on the shoulders of good work, got to really try to move the bar forward. We also brought in a lot of community voices and a lot of people in our community working with the Dreamer populations, and we all committed to a lot of training and learning together in terms of really addressing the needs of the Dreamer population.
That is fantastic. All right, good job on lightning round question number one. Here's lightning round question number two. When we talk about accountability, there's a carrot and a stick. All right, so we can applaud people, we can hug people all we want, but there has to be some very real consequences for not achieving the goals that we set out. So we will start again, Diana, because you're doing such an amazing job setting the tone here. All right. What do you think about that? Right? How would you add to the stick? Well, let me ask it this way. Are you a proponent of the carrot or the stick? Do you think that there is a place for both? Or can we just love our way to accountability? Go.
Well, we can't love our way to accountability, much as we would like to, much as we want to live in a utopia. In my opinion, we can't love our way to it. And that's a difficult question in terms of the stick. However, if we're going to get there, we have to hold people accountable. And I'm nothing if not frank and honest. In Dallas College, we really had no accountability. That's why in this new transformation from 7 colleges, 1 district, we moved to 1 college, 7 campuses. because that will help us better with accountability. So in terms of staff, what we're looking at is, which I referenced in my in answer to one of the questions, we're looking at how we do merit increases for those who are helping fulfill our goals by the metrics, the outcomes, determining that. In terms of the carrot, I mean, we've got a lot of good benefits for our employees, but I've been pushing also, we have to do a lot of professional development because employees are just not going to get there on their own. They don't just wake up and, oh, you know, I'm going to really support racial and ethnic equity. Much as that they might want to, well, what can you do to actually do that? So we've got to put programs in place, initiatives in place to really build that cultural climate and the organizational climate and culture for racial and ethnic equity to thrive, but also to prepare employees to know what they need to do to help that thrive.
All right, thank you. And I apologize, I got distracted. Let the timer go on a little long. My son was returning my iPad to me. Y'all pray for us parents that are sending their kids to school right now and dealing with COVID outbreaks in classes, which now have the kids coming back home looking at us like, hey, mom, hey, dad. All right. Danielle, carrot, stick, do we need one? Do we need the other? Your turn.
Yeah, so I'm a both and kind of person. So I think it's both and, but I certainly think you have to have accountability there, because accountability sets expectations, and more importantly, it builds trust. And I think that's so important and key in many of our communities, especially those who have felt the brunt, right, of the inequities that are rooted in decades of race-based policies. But I also think you have to have accountability, because many of us take our attitudes, our beliefs, et cetera, into these spaces. We don't just become a different person when we walk into a door of an organization or place where we work. And so we have to have some kind of training in place, right? Also to help people to understand why it's so important to make sure that we are being accountable for these equity goals. Because in the end, if you know the expectations, we know why it's so important to have these expectations. We give you the tools, right, in order to make sure you follow where this organization culture is going. Then the carrot comes in, you know, if the employee is able to take the responsibility for the decisions, their actions, their behavior, as well as their performance. And then that can be whatever that carrot might be. But I think you definitely need the both and in this situation, because we are dealing with decades, right, of inequity, and that does not go away overnight and is deeply rooted, and we have to uproot that.
All right, thank you very much. Good job. Eric.
You know, go back to courageous leadership and leadership around equity goals. So it's around building trust. You know, we are in the service of others. So we are helping to organize the data and helping courageous leaders use the data in courageous ways. So, you know, as it relates to our higher ed partners or our K-12 partners, we show up and we are very data driven and we are very collaborative. And so we're trying to help people look at the data and use the data in powerful ways. And that takes time, and that takes building trust, that you're not coming in there to you know, judge or hammer. You're coming in there to empower people and to help them lead their institutions, their departments, in whatever capacity or whatever grain size we're kind of entering. I think it's really important. House Bill 3, again, for the K-12 sector, part of that legislation really mandated that college and career readiness goals at the ISD level had to be disaggregated by race and posted on their websites. So I think legislatively and from a policy standpoint, you know, that's kind of the stick, so to speak, in terms, but it's requiring our K-12, 1,200 school districts to really disaggregate their data for college and career readiness by race and post their goals around it publicly, which is a great thing. And then we get to show up and support the leadership work that, you know, follows.
All right, thank you. Good job. All right, question number 3. Let's see where, oh, here we go. This comes from a viewer. Oh, how can the city of Dallas use infusion of federal dollars to address disparities? All right, that's a little more meaty. So I'm going to give you a minute and a half on that one. All right, Diana, fire away.
So how can the city of Dallas use federal monies
To address disparities.
to address disparity? Well, I think this deep dive into developing a racial and race and equity plan for the city is certainly a beginning where they can use federal funds, because you have to contract with consultants that are hopefully have expertise in this area about how to bring together many people, provide input, sift through all that data, et cetera. That's one way. Another is the $32,000 average salary for some families is just totally unacceptable. So why don't we pick a certain number of families, do case management, why are you where you're at and how can we get you out of there if that's what they choose? I'm just throwing things off the top of my head. Another, which I think the city of Dallas is doing some good work on, is those who were incarcerated and then come out and find difficulty getting jobs. There's some programs helping them transition into the workforce. I think more funding needs to be put into that. Possibly partner with the Dallas ISD to see where there's a synergy to help with the workforce and with the students, because the city of Dallas is a huge employer. Where are their internship opportunities? Because we need, especially Hispanics, need to be employed at a higher level in the city. We don't have equity there in terms of employees at the city. And did you raise your hand that my minute and a half is up?
Oh, you weren't supposed to tell the public that that's what my sneak was, right? Like I just raised my finger in a very calm, collected way to make sure you guys, but now Diana, you gave away my tell, right? Well, good answer, good answer. Danielle?
Yes, so I think, how does the city of Dallas use federal dollars? I think one, there needs to be a consensus on what are the priorities. So it's one thing to get money. It's another thing on who holds the money, what's priority, where does the money go? So I think it's one that consists on what are the top priorities in the city of Dallas in terms of where we want to go with deal with inequity. And second, budgets, right? Budgets are more documents. Do we take a look at the city's budget and where should this money be placed? And then it leads ourselves, to me again, how do we do this? It leads to accountability once again. Once that money is designated, who is really going to be accountable to make sure it is used in the proper way to bring about the equity or to deal with these issues that we have deemed to be priority. And I would certainly say workforce development is certainly something we should really put more money into and be more targeted around. And how do we prepare many of those in the city of Dallas, pathways to opportunities that pay a living wage, right? I think we also have to have a conversation around that in terms of what does it mean to pay living wage for people. We're going to talk about bringing equity as it relates to economic opportunities. So I think the federal dollars can be used in those ways, but we have to do it in a very strategic way. And we do that in conversation with many people, right, across sectors, to have this conversation to come up with a consensus on what is the best way to utilize the dollars to bring about equity.
All right. Thank you very much. I didn't even have to, do my little. All right, Eric.
Well, the question I think was around what the city can do, and in partnership with the education, there's in working with CPAL, Child Poverty Action Lab, there's about $600 million annually in public benefit or social service benefits that go unleveraged and unutilized, and so thinking about investing to help leverage the existing resources that our residents are inequitably not accessing, I think is a really important topic. So we've been having conversations with CPAL, particularly around the student populations. As students enter our higher ed institutions, there are community resources and additional financial resources for And I know this is a huge priority with Dallas College, and that has been for many years. Transportation, food insecurity, housing, mental health resources. So I think those are some investments that we could think about. With House Bill 3, there's $120 million annually on the table in outcomes bonus dollars for our public school districts to leverage and access for helping students, test college ready, pull down a industry certification and enroll in college, as well as continued unrealized dollars on financial aid, both federal and state, that we need to just continue to help our students access and support and leverage and make all these processes much simpler.
Good job. Thank you. All right, next question. So what, as a college president, I am often privy to the frustration that students have with the pace of change, right? They are told to be patient, that things are getting better. And it's hard to accept that when they look around and they see generations of despair. So my question to you, question number 4, is what would you say to our young activists, our young students, our young people who are frustrated and wondering why should they even remain patient or engaged in the system, that the accountability they look for is results, and the results aren't happening fast enough? Diana. Well, wait, Diana, I picked on you first each time, and Diana's looking at me like, yes, I'm okay with the break on this one. All right, so Danielle will come with you, then we'll go with Eric, and then we'll go to Diana. See, that I'm using equity in my question. All right, so.
Yeah, so for me, I mean, just as an organizer and an activist, and as having been a young one in my early 20s, right? I think it really, what I say to young people even now, right? It's about changing from the inside out, right? And I also think it's about not waiting on change, but making that change happen for yourself, and to organize and to mobilize, and that you are the future, right? That you are prepared for this. So I think it's a matter of making sure, how do we support our young activists, our younger people in their efforts to bring about change and to really create the future they see for themselves, right? Because the future does belong to the next generation. And I think it's incumbent upon us who are older, how do we step into that role of really being able to assist them to be the ones to assume leadership role, to assume the ways in which we ought to move forward and have those conversations, and for them to have decision-making power, right? But also being trained so they're clear about how to move forward, how to strategize, how to use data to really to inform, right? Like your movement, not just, what you may be getting off Twitter, but how do you really use, really empirical data to back up what you're going after, and really being steady. It's a steady race, right? But I think we all can get a little bit frustrated with the process, and I'll stop right there.
All right. Eric?
I think student leadership is critical, and student agency and power is even more critical. And I think, I know from your modeling and Chancellor May and President Mung and those in our community, that you meet with students routinely, you listen and you respond. And that's, and you just need to keep doing that. And I think that's just hugely important, that our leaders are, place students first and do things that empower students. We had lots of empathy interviews during COVID, where students really told us about the frustrations in the college enrollment process, where they would be, inside of higher ed portals, and higher ed institutions would be using different vocabulary to describe the same things. And for first generation students, that was really challenging. And so we brought all the higher ed leaders together and said, can we agree on common set of language, common checklist, and really help students demystify some of these processes, and really illustrate for students that we're being a lot more responsive to their needs and listening to them. And it's really inspiring that our higher ed community, gathers, gets together, makes decisions, and starts to make things happen on the behalf of students. And so I think just continuing to do that, it is working in public institutions is public work. It's challenging work, but it's really important work. And we just need to keep the faith and keep placing students first and elevating their positions as leaders and elevating them with the tools and agency they need to, gain access to the things that they value.
All right, thank you. All right, Dan, I bought you an additional 3.5 minutes of thought time.
Well, thank you for that. I was wondering, gosh, go somewhere else first. But anyway, thank you for that. Well, this is, unfortunately, we're in a difficult time when you have so much polarization politically and in society and how people view the world, etc. But so I come from the generation of the Chicano civil rights movement, late 60s, 70s, early 80s. And back then, the doors were closed pretty much to institutions and systems. And we, just like the Black civil rights movement, you had to break down those doors, right? You had to use very drastic measures, the protests, the sit-ins, the hunger strikes, et cetera, to break those doors open. The doors are now open, but you're in, and you're typically at the lower levels. If you got people at the C-suite, the top leadership, it's few and far between. So one of the things, speaking to the Latino experience, a lot of our students do come from first-generation families where they don't have anyone to show them the way, one, to go to college, two, to access a professional life. And then once you get into a corporation or a public entity, how do you learn how to navigate? How do you learn the bureaucracy? How do you learn, organizational culture and climate? I keep speaking to that because that exists everywhere you go for an organization. So one, that's why the pace of change is slow. The doors have been open, but once you get in there, and then oftentimes those that make it in are afraid to speak because they want to keep their job. So we as policymakers need to just continue pushing, and set expectations, set values, to use your approach, Dr. Sorrell, for each corporation, for each organization, that it's okay for employees to speak up and say what's not working for them. And if it's not working for them, it's probably not working for those people who look like them in society. We just need to make it okay for people to speak up. Because again, the doors are open, but those that are in don't know how to navigate as well because of the lack of lived experience of their families in those realms.
No, I think those are all excellent points. One thing that I will say on this question that I think is important, what I have observed is the older that we become, the more successful that we become by whatever society's definition is, or our own, view of what success would look like for our careers, the more cautious and conservative that we become. Right now, it might not be conservative as those who, because I recognize conservative has become a bad word, right? So we'll call those little c conservatives, and I'm talking about big C conservative, which is just the more you have, the more you want to maintain what you have. And what I have recognized on the college campus is perhaps the greatest gift that the students give to us is the gift of continuous discomfort, right? And what I mean by that is, and I tell my children this all the time, nothing great ever comes from places of comfort, right? It's just not possible. You need the tension to produce, the breakthrough. And so I think it's incumbent upon us as leaders to always find ways to place ourselves in the proximity of discomfort, because that will then allow us to continue to ask ourselves the important questions. Why, right? Are we doing enough? How might others view this? And have we become complacent? And I think that is, as we are doing this work, as we are looking at equity, as we are charting a citywide or a countywide response to problems, I think it's absolutely essential that we never lose sight of exactly what it is we're trying to accomplish, right? And for whom this work is so important for. And that I think we want to keep sight of. Now, one last question, and then everyone gets 1 minute for their closing remark. All right. The last question is really, what is the key takeaway that the audience should understand about the role of accountability in establishing equity goals? And Eric, we'll start with you in my commitment to giving Diana a break.
Absolutely. Well, I think there's two uses of data in the accountability picture. One is where we traditionally have lived in Texas, which is compliance. And, that's important so we know where we are. But the second, which we have not tended to well, and not many have, is really activating that data in real time in the case management solution. And I think you talked about it, President Sorrell. It's kind of like moving, how do you get case management and accountability, right? Because we're talking about supporting the personal journey of each and every student, but you need to be collectively accountable for the success of each and every student. So I think, data systems play a big role in that. And we're working really hard here in Dallas County to empower people with better real-time data in systems where they can be more effective with case management and supporting towards those equity goals in their institutions.
All right, thank you. Next up is Danielle.
Yeah, I think I would just add to that is that I think the key thing to understand about the role of accountability and equity goals, again, I think I mentioned it earlier, because it sets expectations, right? And everybody's clear about what these equity goals are. And if they're not met, this is what this means. And everybody is transparent, and this information is accessible and digestible to the people. And I think that's why it's so key to have these the accountability and equity goals. I just think the expectations are so important. And then what happens if that's not met? Because I think that's what people want to know, right? Well, who's going to be accountable making sure this happens? And if it doesn't happen, then what? And I think that's why it's so important that we have these accountability and equitable goals.
Oh, you just flew through that response. You're like the queen of efficiency on that one, Danielle. All right. Diana?
Well, so in terms of accountability, it starts at the top, but it doesn't stay there. It has to be top down and bottom up. Everybody needs to know that they have a role to play in making their organization truly be inclusive and healthy in terms of racial and ethnic equity. But the accountability, as Dr. Ban was saying, you need to rely on data. You need to have a plan, you need to have a budget, and then you need to monitor to make sure you're meeting that plan, meeting those goals. If not, it just becomes, a pretty paper on the shelf or a PowerPoint, and that's it. And nobody pays attention to it. We did our job, we have a plan. Well, hey, what are you doing to make that plan, those goals happen? So, and the data will let you know, if your goals are being met, and if not, why? What do you need to change? What do you need to improve? But if they are being met, fantastic, but how can you sustain and build upon your success? And again, to use a phrase I've already used, if you don't plan, you plan to fail. And that's what's happened all these many years when we've talked about DEI, when we've talked about equal opportunity, et cetera, et cetera. There's no plan and there's no budget. There's no money tied to how we're going to get there. Hopefully now with everything that's going on, where the inequities are just becoming much more stark and much more obvious, leaders, political, public sector will become, and private, corporate leaders will become much more serious and meaningful, and put the money where your mouth is in terms of making race and equity happen across their organizations and across society. It can happen. Where there's a will, there's a way. I mean, look, and let's take the example of smoking. When you found out that secondhand smoke was dangerous to you, that those that didn't smoke, I mean, it seemed like almost like that, everybody enacted laws and ordinances, et cetera. But here we are 200 something years later, still trying to figure out equality, race, and ethnic equity. It can happen. We just need to all buy into it. And for those that don't, great. But for those that do, make the changes, we can make them.
Well, I plan to give you all a minute to wrap up, but I feel like you did such a good job wrapping up on that one. And, you know, there's never a bad time to end the discussion with the conversation that if it doesn't have dollars, it will not make sense, than to sum up the way Diana put it. So let me just say this on behalf of the panelists. First, we want to thank everyone for the opportunity of participating and supporting Chief Liz. That's my new name for you, Liz, is Chief Liz, and her department in this critically important work. You know, that which gets measured gets done. And that which you measure needs the resources. And so as we step away, I just want to, again, encourage everyone to remain vigilant in engaging with this issue and remain vigilant in making sure that those entities that we care about remain committed to this work and consistent and faithful to it. So with that, Chief Liz, we say thank you, and we will turn this back over to you.
Well, don't turn it back over to me too quickly, President Sorrell, because I'd love for this panel and its moderator to stay on with us as we close out our third annual Equity Indicator Symposium. And I would just like to, again, reiterate what several people have stated in this moment of acknowledging the life, the death, and the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And what it means to all of us right in this moment, as we try to establish a movement around his legacy of what it means for our generations, and namely our students, as was really highlighted in this last panel, about where are they going to go and how are we going to quickly hand the baton off to them. And so we are One Dallas. We share that value with our partner, Paul Quinn College, of We Over Me. And we have established a website called weareonedallas.org, where all of you can go to make your comments about what we're doing right, what we're doing mediocre, and what we're doing just plain wrong in your assessments. No, there are a few moderator rules, but we want you to be honest with us. And we want to hear clearly from you, and you want us to hold you accountable. We want you to hold us accountable. And so with that, I'd like for all of the panelists today who are still with us and our community members who are still with us to turn on your cameras so that we can be all One Dallas together in this small space. And to know that in this virtual environment where we know that we can connect this way, many people can't connect this way still. And so we will collectively work on bridging our digital divide. But knowing that, can you spread this word about racial equity and our racial equity planning process? Can you share this word with your networks, with your communities, with your faith groups, and let them know that there is a survey that they can find, and it's in various languages, where they can call if they don't feel comfortable putting it in writing, and give us their notions of what racial equity means for our city. And you can find that all on our website. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lindsay Wilson, who's going to close us out today. And also, please put on your cameras if you can, so that we can show that we are One Dallas together. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you, Chief Liz. And to the previous panelists and Dr. Sorrell, I truly appreciate the lightning round, the carrot and the stick question, what the city can do, where accountability sits, and most importantly, if it does not have dollars, it doesn't make sense. Before we close, though, I want to take this opportunity. The Office of Equity and Inclusion and partnership with COSPERO, again, is currently in the midst of this racial equity plan. And so just want to take a few minutes to highlight, if we can share the screen, Kevin, highlight what it is, the racial equity plan, the purpose behind it, what we're currently doing, how we need your voice in this plan as we are setting these clear-cut measurements. I think the slideshow is coming up. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so I will go ahead and just start briefly talking again about the racial equity plan. And this is the city's first racial equity plan, and it was birthed from the racial equity resolution and is being led by the Office of Equity and Inclusion. We are referring to this plan as a strategic framework that is developed in collaboration with communities to support the city in not only understanding, but addressing the disparities that we see both in the equity indicators report and beyond. The racial equity plan will provide the city leaders with actionable levers by establishing short, mid, and long-term goals to minimize inequities for Dallas's residents. Oh, there's the slideshow. Perfect. Let's go ahead and go on to the next slide around the goals with the racial equity plan. The goals of the racial equity plan is to accurately reflect priorities of community members most impacted by institutional racism, to align department practices and investments to most effectively address racial disparities, and really to solidify accountability measures and recommend progress monitoring systems. And so what that means currently, and as we continue to move along on this process, is we are talking internally to our city departments at the same time that we're doing community engagement. So it's live and informing what we are doing day to day as we are developing this plan. Next slide, please. Much of what we've heard across all three panels are really guiding the work that we're doing with city departments as we are working to establish these measurements, which are informed again by the feedback that we are getting from the We Are One Dallas website, from the community conversations that are currently taking place. But what you all will be able to see in this plan is a specific population named in these measurements that outlines a baseline and the goal, where we're going in 3 to 5 years. Most importantly, the annual targets to reach that goal. And so we certainly are looking forward to additional feedback on how the city can be accountable for not only this plan, but specifically the measurements that are stemming from the work that we're currently doing. Community engagement, we are centering. This plan will address historic inequities and be translated in the top 10 most spoken languages in Dallas. And again, accountability. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it to our community partner who's leading the community engagements, Herald, to walk us through how everyone on this call can get involved.
Thanks, Dr. Wilson. Our team at Sparrow has had the honor of working with the city of Dallas on this incredibly important project, and we are excited about the future ahead. I want to share with you all, we've mentioned this website quite a few times, but just want to give you a preview before we close out today. It's been mentioned that there are lots of different ways that you can get engaged and weigh in. And so we've got to be creative in these COVID times. And so you will find on the We Are One Dallas website a lot of the information that Dr. Wilson just shared. There is a list of frequently asked questions that exist on the website. So if you're curious about what the racial equity plan is, what is the desired impact, so on and so forth. And on the Engage tab, there are lots of different options. So you'll see there's a phone number listed. Again, we want to reach everyone. And so for those who might not be comfortable with a survey or others, you can dial into this phone number and there's a 2-minute it will give you 2 minutes just to share your thoughts and your reactions, right, to a prompt, and our team gets all of that information, and we are paying attention to all of it in real time. And it is shaping. We are meeting with departments every day, and we are taking that community engagement in real time to shape the work that we're doing internally across the 40+ departments in the city of Dallas. So that is one option. There is a survey that is linked. Again, we are trying to create as much access as possible. There is a quick poll that you can find on the left, right, that just gets to the priorities of that the community has. And then there are surveys that have been mentioned that are translated into multiple languages that you can also have if you have more time. And this entire website, if you scroll up to the top, you can translate our website into any language that is needed there. So again, we're trying to create the access that we know our city deserves. There's also a forum that we would love for you to weigh in on before you sign off with this today. There's a prompt there that talks about what specific ideas the community has for monitoring the city's progress in closing racial disparities. So again, you can agree with other community members' perspectives and weigh in that way. And then last but certainly not least, there's an events page there. Our team, we are masking up and social distancing. We know we've got to meet folks where they're at, and we know how important this work is, and we get one shot at it. And so we are offering both still in-person and virtual engagements for our community to come out and hear about the racial equity plan and to weigh in on it. And then last but not least, either you can make a request for our team at Cospero or from the OEI team or both of us to come and talk to your organization. We have been presenting to staffs at churches, at nonprofits, community-based organizations across the city. We have also been, again, engaging with neighborhood associations and so on and so forth. So if you are a part of an organization or even a small group that you meet with, weekly or quarterly, if it's a social group, we're happy to come and present about this work to them. So please, there are so many opportunities to engage here on the site. We want this process to be transparent. And again, this information is being used in real time to help us shape these progress measures. So thank you all so much for joining us. The link has been dropped in the chat. Again, we are onedallas.org, and we look forward to connecting with many of you over the upcoming months. We hope to have the final plan developed by the end of May, is when the community can expect that.
Thank you for that, Harold. And we will be dropping a link to a survey for today's event. Please, if you have a moment, take that survey and provide us authentic and real feedback. What was good? What was missing? What do we need to do next? I would like to just take the time to thank you all for staying with us, joining us today for the third annual Equity Indicators Symposium. And as Vice Chair has named it, which I fully embrace, Happy Equity Indicators Day. The City of Dallas would like to thank all of our policymakers who joined us today, and more importantly, the work that the city leaders are doing and setting a foundation to allow the work that the Office of Equity and Inclusion to do to be possible. We also want to thank our moderators, Sarah, Herald, and Dr. Sorrell, all of our panelists, and our co-host, Communities Foundation of Texas. As Vice Chair Thomas mentioned earlier, this is the third year of the symposium, and we've come a long way from our first year at Paul Quinn, where we were analyzing and discussing the equity indicators to report, to where we're at today, having the report guide the city's first racial equity plan. So again, we encourage you all to act today, to work towards setting measurements in your own spaces that will address racial and ethnic inequities, to set accountability matrix to assess the progress that is happening. We all have a role in this work to get to the transformative change that is needed to close the disparities that we face here in Dallas. And in the words of Martin Luther King Jr., our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter most. And addressing inequities matters, and we must not be silent about the realities of our role in tackling them. Thank you again.